Jo Garrett. I live in Penryn in Cornwall, and I'm based at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health, which is part of the medical school. Today I'm going to be talking about the links between blue spaces and well-being. I'm going to be talking about some of the science and also link that with my own personal experience of my nearby blue space during this past year and some ideas of how these can be applied for your own interactions with blue spaces. So you've probably heard that there is evidence that links nature with health and well-being. However, much of this was focused on the links between green spaces, such as parks, for example, and health, and much less was known about blue spaces and health. Blue Health was established in 2016, led by the team here at ECEHH, and it finished at the end of December. It was a multi-partner project spanning 9 European countries. It's focused on understanding how water-based environments are related to human health and well-being in towns and cities. The project considered both the risks and the benefits. So what exactly do we mean by blue spaces? In Blue Health, we defined blue spaces as environments which prominently feature water that are accessible to people. But this can be accessible in a number of ways, such as having a view of a blue space, visiting, as you might expect, or even visiting virtually. And these blue spaces can be found in urban environments or rural environments. So they might include a small stream or a pond, or a lake or reservoir, a harbour, a seaside promenade, canal or fountain, or a beach or other coastal site, as you might expect. So what have we learned from the research investigating the potential links between blue spaces and health and well-being? There have been quite a few studies which show that living close to blue spaces is associated with better self-reported health, mental health and well-being. Most of this evidence has been for the coast, with much less evidence about freshwater inland blue spaces. Just to explain that when I say self-reported, I mean that we're using measures where people have been asked about their health and well-being, for example in surveys, rather than actual medical information such as doctors' diagnoses. Nevertheless, these measures have been shown to be reliable and are used in all sorts of ways in research and science. While there is less research about freshwater blue spaces, they are also thought to have similar health benefits. Some really interesting research by my colleague Tytti Passanen, who visited us on Blue Health from Finland for a while, explored the relationship between blue spaces and health and well-being. She used a large data set called the Health Survey for England, and we had the data from 2008 to 2012 with a sample of nearly 22,000 people. For all of these respondents, we knew how close they lived to the coast, how much green space there was in the neighbourhood around them, and how much freshwater blue space there was as well. And she found that living near the coast was associated with better self-reported general and mental health, and that this relationship was partially explained by more outdoor, land-based physical activity, primarily walking. So people who lived closer to the coast were happier and healthier, and they were also doing more physical activity. Although water sports were more common among those living within 5 kilometres of the coast, this did not explain the associations between coastal proximity and health, showing that you don't need to be on or in the water to get benefits from it. Just walking is associated with these health benefits. She did also find that presence of fresh water in the neighbourhood was associated with better mental health, but this effect was not explained by physical activity, meaning something else was causing that effect. So we've seen that living closer to blue spaces is associated with better mental health, and that this relationship might be explained, at least partly, by more physical activity. So why might this be? Well, one reason might be that it encourages physical activity. I personally try and go for a run once a week, and I get this view on my way back, although it's not always blue sky, of course. A lab-based study by Dr. Matt White tested exercising in simulated different natural environments. Participants cycled on a stationary exercise bike for 15 minutes while facing either a blank wall, which was the control, or while watching one of 3 videos, an urban environment, a countryside, or a coastal environment. only the simulated blue environment was associated with shorter perceived exercise duration than the control, and participants were also more willing to repeat exercise if they had done it in the blue setting. Obviously, this is a lab-based study with a relatively small sample, but maybe this is one reason why blue spaces are good for us. They encourage us to do physical activity. We feel the exercise is shorter and we're more happy to repeat it. And physical activity isn't just good for our physical health, it's also good for our well-being. So maybe if you're struggling to get motivated to go outside for some physical activity, picking somewhere with an attractive blue space might help you to stick at it, or somewhere else that you really like. We also find that people who live closer to blue spaces are more likely to visit. This may be unsurprising, but we have shown this in our Blue Health research. As part of the Blue Health project, we carried out the Blue Health International Survey. This was an online survey which took place in 18 different countries, mostly in Europe, but other places also wanted to get involved around the world. We think this was the first large-scale study of its kind, specifically interested in blue spaces and health. Using the results from this survey, my colleague Dr. Lewis Elliott showed that people who lived closer to the coasts, lakes and rivers were more likely to visit. For example, for those living within 1 kilometre of lake, respondents were 3 times as likely to visit weekly compared to those living more than 5 kilometres away. In my own research, in a sample of 1,000 people, mainly older adults in Hong Kong, we found that those visiting blue space at least once a week were more likely to report high levels of well-being compared to those who never visited, while visiting green space was not significantly related to well-being. So just to sum up what we've talked about so far, we've seen that living closer to blue spaces is associated with better health and well-being, and this is partly explained by more physical activity. We've also seen that the closer you live to blue spaces, the more likely you are to visit, and that visiting regularly is associated with well-being. So do we know why might this be beyond physical activity? Well, not for definite, but there are some proposed ways. We think that nature, and blue spaces in particular, are restorative environments. There are 2 related theories which have been proposed to explain the apparent restorative benefits from nature interactions. One of these is called attention restoration theory. This was predominantly thought to help your mind recover from emotional and cognitive fatigue, such as when your brain is tired after doing lots of work, for example. Numerous studies have found improvements in concentration, for example, after contact with nature. Stress recovery theory proposes that in nature, your body recovers from the physiological responses to stress. Studies have found that blood pressure is lower, for example, after contact with nature. A key component of attention restoration theory is the idea of soft fascination. This is where your intention is held, but it is not effortful. Your brain isn't trying hard to maintain focus. And this is thought to help your mind recover from mental fatigue. For example, in natural spaces, this may be the presence of wildlife, trees blowing in the wind, or with particular relevance for our talk today, the movement of water. In a study using the Monitor for Engagement with the Natural Environment survey in England, Dr. Matt White found that people reported visits to coastal environments were particularly restorative. And this was similar to some other environments as well, including mountains, moorlands and woodlands. So these environments have all been reported to be particularly restorative. I am lucky to live within walking distance of a reservoir. It's about a 20-minute walk up to here. Again, it's not always blue sky. When I get there, I stand by the water for a few moments and I'll take a look around to notice what's going on. I'll watch the ripples in the water or try and spot some birds. Recently, there have been a few tufted ducks around. These ducks are black and white and they submerge fully underwater to feed, and then they pop back up again with their buoyancy, which I find quite entertaining to watch for a few moments, and they always make me smile. Once I saw a cormorant fly a few laps around this reservoir before flying off, and that was quite relaxing. Now it's winter with less leaves on the branches, the light passes through the trees and makes what I thought were quite cool patterns from the branches on the water as it ripples. So whatever blue space you have near you, next time you're there, maybe take a few moments and just pause, take it in, and look around you. The environment will always change as well with the weather, and the sounds may also contribute to the restorative experience. I often walk while listening to a podcast, but I only have one headphone in so that I can hear the sounds, other sounds as well. I don't know too much about this, but as well as restoration, this kind of practice is also similar to parts of mindfulness practice, which you may be already aware of, to be aware of your surroundings and in the moment. Is there anything else going on which links blue spaces to better mental health and physical health? Nature connectedness is another psychological concept which may help to explain the links between blue spaces and health. Nature connectedness is your subjective sense of connection with the natural world, kind of like how important it is to you and your identity. So I include this figure to illustrate further really the concept of nature connectedness. This is how we measured it in the Blue Health Survey. And we explored it using the scale pictured here, which is called the Inclusion of Nature and Self scale. Our respondents were asked to select the option they felt reflected themselves, with the options ranging from two circles, one representing the self and one representing nature, and they start from being not overlapping at all to fully overlapping, reflecting how connected people feel to nature. So nature connectedness is associated with high levels of well-being, and visiting nature is associated with higher levels of nature connectedness. As I mentioned regularly, I walk up to the reservoir near where I live. Early on in lockdown 1, I was aware that I might start getting bored. Luckily, it was spring at the time and I started noticing the flowers. I decided to try and spot and learn a new flower species on every walk. At first, I used an app called Seek to identify them, and it did stop me getting bored, and I started looking around me a lot more on my way up to the reservoir, although there did start to be fewer flowers by the time it got to be late summer. Learning flower species was something that I never thought I'd be interested in, being more of a water person, but I got a wildflower guide and started using that instead of the app. I was learning a skill and I felt like I was achieving something. Also, I got to know this place very well. I knew where all the flowers were, and I also noticed the changes with the seasons. As I learnt more about the area and grew more familiar with it, my connection to the place and the nature present grew. Maybe there's a way you would like to learn more about the biodiversity in your nearby nature, or perhaps connect to your environment in another way that suits you. But for me, this has been a huge part of my lockdown experience, I think, getting to know the area around me. Another important thing we're finding in our research is that blue spaces are important for social interaction. This may not be super relevant right now, but maybe you can drag your housemates out to join you. I've enjoyed sharing my nearby blue space with my friends for a socially distanced walk, pointing out the particular bits that I've got to know. In my own research, I've been using the Blue Health International Survey, which I have talked about already, to explore the wellbeing outcomes from recent nature visits. As part of the survey, our respondents from the 18 different countries were asked to think about their most recent visit to a blue space. They were asked a range of questions, including when this visit took place, what the environment was like, including what blue space was it, and other characteristics as well, such as perceived water quality and safety. They were asked what they did while they were there, how long they spent there, and who they went with. They were also asked a range of wellbeing outcomes about their visit. My research question was, what is the relationship between different blue space visit characteristics and wellbeing outcomes? And these characteristics included the characteristics of the environment and characteristics of the visit, including the duration and activity. We explored different aspects of wellbeing for our outcomes, but today I'm just going to focus on one of them. We asked our respondents how happy the visit made them, and they were asked to state how much they agreed or disagreed that the visit made them happy. We also asked them about the qualities of the environment, And again, they were asked to say how much they agreed or disagreed with the statements: I felt safe, there was wildlife to see and enjoy, the area was free from litter or vandalism, and there were good facilities. This figure shows the results of statistical analysis exploring the relationship between the blue space qualities and the well-being outcome, visit happiness. The different environmental qualities are represented in the different colours, which are described in the legend. On the x-axis, we have the perceived environmental quality score, with the score increasing from left to right, with better environmental quality. Positive values above 0 represent where respondents agreed that the environment was safe, for example, and values less than 0 represent where respondents disagreed with the statement. On the y-axis, we have the predicted happiness outcome, which with happiness increasing from bottom to top. So we can see that for 3 of the qualities, facilities, absence of litter, and the presence of wildlife, they have very similar relationships. A gradual but positive increase in these qualities was associated with increasing happiness. So as, for example, those respondents who reported more wildlife present, which is in the dark blue, they also reported that the visit made them happier. However, there is not much difference between the happiness experienced in the lowest levels of wildlife and the highest. However, for perceived safety, we can see that there is a much stronger relationship, where those who didn't think the blue space they visited was safe also reported not feeling as happy from the visit. So if you are able and you do have choices about where to go, picking somewhere where you feel safe to visit may also help you to get the most out of your visit. And finally, what if you can't get to an outdoor blue space? In an experimental study, participants were first asked to watch an intentionally boring video. They then watched either an underwater scene on a TV, a 360 video using a virtual reality headset, or a computer-generated virtual underwater scene. The results found that all viewing methods reduced negative feelings such as sadness, as well as significantly reducing boredom. However, only the interactive computer-generated virtual reality experience led to increases in positive feelings such as happiness and strengthened how connected people felt to nature. This experiment was one step towards exploring the potential uses of virtual spaces for people in residential health or elderly care, but perhaps it can also inform us as well. Even by watching a video of underwater, that can help us may help to feel us less sad. And for me personally, I also have blue spaces as my background on my desktop, and they're also associated with my own memories as well. They're my own photos from trips that I've taken, so that also helps with boosting my mood because I remember those visits. And finally, what is the evidence that access to nature and blue spaces may help us to cope? In a survey of people in multiple countries during lockdown 1, so March to April last year, including Spain, where there were very strict lockdown rules, and the UK as well, it was found that those living with lockdown restrictions, where there was no access to public outdoor space, such as Spain, were more likely to show symptoms of anxiety and depression than those who did have access to public outdoor space, like we did here, even though it was partially allowed. This indicates that access to nature may help us in coping with our restrictions. And I personally feel like it helped me massively when I found out that Cornwall was going straight from Tier 1 to Tier 3 restrictions. Even though I knew we were lucky to have been in Tier 1 at all, I did find that hard at the moment. But I went for my walk to the reservoir with a podcast in one ear and came back feeling much better and able to get on with my day. So overall, to sum up, we've found that people who live closer to blue spaces and visit more often have better health and well-being. While we can't really be sure yet of why this is, blue spaces may encourage physical activity. They may help our mind recover from stress and fatigue. They may increase nature connection, which is associated with well-being, and they are also places for social interactions. This list does not represent the only ways in which blue spaces can impact our well-being. For example, an area beyond my scientific knowledge is the links between blue spaces and inspiration, such as inspiring art and creativity. And this may be another way to connect with your local environment, but we have very little evidence on that at the moment. And there may be other ways as well. Our blue space research has mostly focused on large cross-sectional surveys, which means that conclusions we draw are for the population on average and don't necessarily apply for everyone. But maybe there are some tips you can take away from some of this research and try yourself. Is there something you want to learn about your nearby nature? Maybe it's the flowers, the trees, or the birds. Can you notice something new when you go for a walk? And maybe take a few moments to pause, to feel the wind, watch the water rippling, or listen to the birds. You can find out more about all of our activities, find summaries and links to all our publications, and download resources on the Blue Health website. And papers also continue to be published. So thanks for listening, and any questions? And I'll try and stop sharing. Hopefully that stopped sharing now.
Thank you, Jo. That was really interesting. It's nice to sort of think about why you feel better, or I know I feel better by these blue spaces, and it's interesting to see sort of scientifically why that might be the case. I also found myself feeling happier as you described your own nature experiences, because I could almost visualize myself being out there. So that was really good, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Jo about her research or blue spaces, or any tips for anyone else to try?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. If anyone else has other ways of their interaction with blue space that they find really help them.
I like the idea about identifying the flowers when you're doing a route, because I have to do the same route sort of every day around the village, so it's a good way of making it different. We've got a question. Sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. Reza?
Yes, hi. Just wondering whether also explore sounds of nature in in addition to or in place of images of the blue or green environment.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's not an area I know loads about, but there is research that says that birdsong, for example, is associated with well-being, and also water as well, the sound of running water. But my colleague Alex Smalley, who's a PhD student at the Wellcome Centre in Exeter, he is looking at this kind of thing a bit more, and he has done some research where it was just sounds, and they varied it between the abiotic sounds of nature, so things like wind and water, and then added the sounds from animals as well, like birds, and then also added sounds, cultural sounds, so they included a poem, and they looked at the different well-being outcomes resulting from those. And you'll need to look at his research to find out the answer, but I'm pretty sure that the ones with biotic components, so the animals, scored pretty highly in his results.
Funnily enough, I had an interview with him for a podcast that Student Communications are producing, and we were going to release that, and he shared secrets of his research and his findings. So do have a look out for that if you're interested in more virtual nature experiences and sounds in particular.
What was the name again?
Alex Smalley. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. Jane, you've got a question?
Hi, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I graduated at Falmouth University last summer, and this year I propose setting up workshops. I live at Upton Towns, Withian, Hale Beach, and I graduated as a textile designer weaver. And my proposition for workshops is to invite clients to come and stay here or visit me here, take them for a walk to the beach, and then gather maybe grasses and things, and to incorporate them into a weave project for half day or whole day visit. I was just wondering, as I'm collating and putting together these workshops to invite people, where is the best place for me to find the information about the blue health effects? Would it be your website? Is there plenty of information for me to collate data from there, or do you have other ideas?
Yeah, our website is definitely a good place to start. We've got so there's links to all the publications with short summaries, and as well we produced a resource at the end of the project which kind of summarized the findings that we'd had so far. So that's a really accessible a place to start. Obviously it predominantly focuses on the research from the Blue Health Project, whereas there is other research as well, although some is mentioned, it's not gone into much detail. So you will have to explore a little bit further around that, but I can't think of any broader place to go that would be easy. So I would definitely suggest starting with our website, and I'll put a link to that resource I mentioned in the chat.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And will this be recorded for us to view later, for me to pick up these links?
Yes, I'm recording it currently, and we'll share the links with it as well for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Amelia has made a comment in the chat saying she's a recent graduate from the university, and she wrote her dissertation on this topic. She says that when she moved back home after finishing uni and was no longer within walking distance of the sea, that not being able to walk to the sea or the beach made a real difference to her well-being, which I can imagine.
Yeah, I've always lived by the sea, or at least, yeah, fairly good access to it. So I can imagine that'd be really hard. You could try seeing if there are any other blue spaces nearby. It's probably not exactly the same benefit, but you might get something different out of it, and something else that you can start to appreciate about your local nature. But yeah, the sea is special.
Yeah, definitely. Although I think you get not quite the same, but a similar effect from being by a river, or I think it's just the running water.
Yeah, the water's so different in, like, my reservoir. It's not flowing, but the wind moves it across the surface, and then you've got rivers with flowing water, as you say, and then the sea with the waves going backwards and forwards, and then even somewhere like a fountain, which also has different movements of water. So I think there can be all sorts of different ways that we can connect with water.
Rebecca says that she had a similar experience. This is swimming in the sea during the warmer weather. I have to say I've been quite tempted to do some cold water swimming lately.
There's lots of interesting cold water swimming at the moment, and quite a lot of qualitative research. So that's where researchers go out and talk to people and interview people and try and bring together themes from what multiple people have said, but they have a small sample size and you don't really get a quantitative health outcome benefit. So I'm a quantitative researcher, but there is quite a lot of qualitative research which does explore swimming and immersion in water specifically. So if you are interested in that kind of thing, there is some research out there, but I think we've seen a lot more people take up cold water swimming recently with COVID. I certainly know a lot of people who have. Personally, being cold is not for me, but it does seem anecdotally that people are getting benefits from it.
And if you look at Instagram, you'd believe it.
Yeah, just remember to stay safe and know where you're swimming.
Yes, definitely. We've got a couple of hands raised. Susanna, do you have a question?
Yes, sorry about that. I was trying to find my microphone. It was actually in you were talking earlier, and I put my hand up then. It was about the oh, the organisations. I've actually almost forgotten because I've been so interested in absolutely everything you've said. I'm part of student support from Dexter Plus, and we provide one-to-one group support. But one of our colleagues left. She's a mental health nurse. She went because of her love for the sea, and she set up an organisation called Theracy. And I just googled her thing quickly because I haven't spoken to her for about 2 years now, just to have a look. And yeah, it's about the love of the benefits of the sea, the water, and mental health, well-being. So much of what you're talking about with water. It's worth a look at if you're interested in that. Then
Thank you very much.
A site worth looking at.
If you wanted to share that in the chat, Susanna, that would be great.
I'll do that right now. I was also just thinking that even I have chatted about the left and so the north and south coast can have such a different impact upon someone's well-being. So, like yourself, I grew up in Cornwall, but I grew up on the north coast where there's waves. There's real waves.
Much wilder.
You go to the sea for a different reason than you would for a different mood impact. I think when I go to the beach here, where I now live in Falmouth, and I feel like I'm on holiday, and even though I live here, and I don't know how other people feel with that.
Yeah, it was very warm at the weekend. Yeah, there are, so talking about Theracy, which I haven't heard of before, but there are multiple organisations now that offer blue care interventions, they're often called. So for example, like surf therapy is often used for people with mental health problems, and there are reviews summing up those kind of activities as well. I'm not really an expert in that area, but there are at least one or two attempts to scientifically explore those kind of interventions.
We've got a hand there from Reza. Do you have a question?
A supplementary question, if I may. I'm just wondering, you said you have done quantitative measurements. I was wondering whether you have done any demographics on the subjects. I'm particularly interested in the BAME communities, whether their score or level of happiness is at the baseline any different, or whether they change their degree of happiness from one climate to another.
So I'm not quite sure I got all of your question, but you're specifically interested in the BAME groups and blue spaces. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. The baseline.
So that hasn't been looked at a lot yet. There are some like thought pieces and qualitative pieces thinking about different cultural connotations of blue spaces, where, for example, here our relationship with blue spaces is quite a safe environment, where that might not be the case everywhere. But specifically with the Blue Health International Survey, we asked people whether they were a minority ethnic group in their country. And that is something that we've just started the analysis on now. So watch this space, but it is something we are working on. Hope that, I know it doesn't answer your question now, but hopefully it will do soon.
Thank you both for that. We've got a question in the chat. Sorry, is it Lucina? The question being, it would be interesting to see how an individual's behaviour would change when access to blue spaces or green spaces is restricted, either fully or partly. Would it share similar traits to SAD?
I'm not sure about SAD, to be honest. I don't really know anything about that, so Not going to comment on that. But I think that's what interesting you say about when our access has changed. But actually, we have that with the COVID pandemic. That in the study that I mentioned in the presentation, they called it an unwelcome but natural experiment, where you can look at the differences between countries, and they compared those in Spain particularly who were not allowed to leave their house at all with those of us here where we were allowed to go outside for exercise once a day. And they found that, yeah, there was a considerable impact on well-being, in particular for people in Spain who couldn't access outdoor spaces. And I think there's also a lot of pieces of work around, or that people will start to explore this more in future when our environments are degraded as well. So if your environment changes, like with ecosystem degradation, or for example litter. For me, I was absolutely heartbroken when they cut the grass on my way up to the reservoir and all my flowers were gone. You know, that took me a couple of days to get over that, even though I think it's a good way to manage it in the long term. But yeah, I think that kind of thing definitely affects your well-being from my personal experience.
Yeah, my personal experience would say the same. Ollie, do you have a question?
I do, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for an awesome talk, Jo. It's been really cool. I'm a well-being researcher, and in my spare time, I surf and wild swim. So everything you're talking about is really exciting. Is there anybody that's in the team that's into blue care interventions that that you work with? Any colleagues that do like surf therapy stuff and wild swimming?
They have done that in the past. Matt White has done a little bit on it in the past. But research to look out for would be Eski Britton, who did a review on blue care interventions. I will put the reference in the chat for you. But she's based in Ireland, I think. But she does work with us. She has worked with the ECHH on a different project called Sophie, Seas, Oceans and Public Health in Europe. So that might be another place to look for resources, although that is slightly broader project looking at all sorts of health benefits from the seas, such as fisheries and nutrition from seafood, for example. I'll just find that reference for you and put it in the chat now.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We're coming towards the end of the time. Does anyone have any other questions?
I can see a hand up. Is that an old hand?
I think that might be Ollie's hand. Yeah, that's gone down now. Tessa's shared a link to Surf Action.
Oh, thanks, Tessa.
Do some work with surfing and mental health. So yeah, that looks like worth a look. There's quite a few good links in there if people want to have a look at them and research a bit more. But I think we'll call it a day. Do you have... Sorry, Jo.
I think there's another Cornwall-based charity as well that what are they called? But I'm pretty sure there's another, the Cornwall-based wave surf therapy as well, which I now can't remember. But there definitely are ones out there. Thank you for that, Tessa, for putting that link in.